Great. Again, my name is Becky Gord, and I'm a program coordinator on the Network TA team with Rural Health Innovations, or RHI. Before we begin the presentation on building a culture of innovation and creativity, I'd like to point out the Network Self-Assessment tool that's available in the file share box in the lower left corner of the webinar screen. And this is the same document that we reviewed during the other 3 webinars of the Network Leadership series. The self-assessment is one of your grant deliverables, which is due 90 days after the end of the grant, and this tool can be used to fulfill that deliverable. And the tool asks questions about your network's current status as it relates to your structure and member engagement and your different planning approaches. And along the way, it identifies a number of best practices your network might want to consider to achieve long-term sustainability. Each webinar in this series has guided you through different elements of the self-assessment tool while giving you a chance to learn from other networks in the program that are exploring the same issues. Today, we'll be rounding out the series by reviewing the very last section of the tool. And we encourage you to work on your self-assessment over the next couple of months and email us a draft or a work in progress to us at RHI before the end of your grant. And this will give us another chance to provide you with TA related to your network's needs, and we can also help answer any questions about the self-assessment you may have at that time. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter for the webinar series on network leadership, who will be leading us through today's presentation on innovation and creativity, Mary Kay Chess. Mary Kay Chess, PhD, is Dean of Academic Affairs at Pinchot University in Seattle, Washington. She teaches system thinking and complexity, adaptive change strategies, and leadership and personal development. Mary Kay held executive roles in rural and urban hospitals and healthcare systems, as well as in shared services networks of medical groups and hospitals. She consults with organizations and their boards on building the leadership capacity necessary for thriving in a complex world. In addition, she serves as a leadership coach to executives and faculty teaching teams. Mary Kay designs and leads the Leadership Development Program for the National Cooperative of Health Networks, NCHN. Welcome, Mary Kay. Thank you very much for joining us. I will now turn it over to you.
Becky, thank you, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this final session. And Becky's going to be pulling up the slides for us in just a moment, and as she said, those are available to you as the takeaway from this conversation that we hope to have. Thank you as well, while the slides are coming up, for going ahead and filling out the kind of it'll whet your appetite, we hope, kind of the pre-questions on innovation, brainstorming, and visioning. And one of the points that we wanted to make from this is that every network is unique. Every advisory group or every board is equally unique, and bringing in all of those creative thoughts, approaches, pulling out our assumptions on what works and doesn't is really an important process. Let's see, here we go with the slides. If you'll also at the same time, as Becky said, I encourage you to pull out your assessment tool. We're going to cover the final 5 questions today in Section E, and that will give you at least the first draft if you've been a part of all of these discussions. So here's what we're going to talk about today, and again, as always, I would so appreciate hearing voices, whether it's literal voices, and a star and a 2 will allow you to speak right into this community of inquiry, or if you would like to use the chat box, please feel free, and that allows all of us to kind of share best practices. So let me just do a sound check. Becky, is everything coming through okay?
You sound loud and clear, Mary Kay. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right, here we go. Everybody ready? And again, please, this is a session, this final and 4th session, created for you. So at any point, if you have questions or if you have a practice that you would like to share with everyone else, this particular session is really all around sustainability of a network, and it is infused with how do we create sustainability. One way to create it is through leveraging innovation and creativity. So here we go. Just here's what we're going to combine today in this exploration. Some of the, a look back at what you've thought about change, those of you who were on the call last time, and we'd like to hear what came out of the last 30 days or 20, maybe it was 27 days since we last met. We'll look at the section E on the assessment, and we'll go ahead and answer each one of those questions, including doing a human mapping, a virtual human mapping of all of your board members and their level of creativity and innovation, or your advisory group members. And we're going to use those terms for our conversation today interchangeably. We know some of you will not be moving toward a board formation, but will continue to leverage your advisors in the community. So please know that if we use advisors, we also mean board. If we use board members, we also include advisors in our thinking there. So that's what's going to be accomplished today. We're going to look at what's needed, what's necessary, and what contributes. If you were to say, I just want to pause here and kind of get your fingers warmed up and bring everyone into the conversation. When I say that innovation is critical to network sustainability, what one word comes to your mind when I say innovation is critical? What is a thought or a word or an image, a metaphor, however you want to describe innovation? Could you each go ahead and tap that into the chat box for us real quickly, and we're going to build a virtual inventory of what innovation might mean. This is my way of making sure everyone's off their iPhones and into this circle and leaving their last meeting behind. And also I find when we do this, we really start to influence each other on how we've embedded creativity and innovation in our own networks. So just go ahead and everyone go ahead and put in your word about innovation. Perfect. Look at this. Polly, I have to tell you, these are all great, but I love Polly's that says it's a great survival strategy. I've been working with a group of CEOs, and one of the things that they decided as we were covering a number of qualities required in adaptive leadership was a great sense of humor. So I think, Polly, a great sense of humor and innovation as a survival strategy would be good. David, thank you. Using innovation really as a strategy to deliver on mission and vision. Perfect. Open-mindedness for sure, Veronica. You'll see that in a few minutes I've pulled some quotes from people who are known to be innovators and creators, and if any of you are familiar with Tina Fey, one of the things she says is never tell anyone that you're working with they're crazy. Never tell them that their ideas are crazy. Just nod sagely and take it all down. So that's part of the work of innovation and creativity, allowing kind of the unorthodox, out-of-the-box thoughts to emerge in meetings and to capture those and to allow them to influence your vision and your mission. Okay, thank you all. I really appreciate that. And we started each one of these 4 sessions suggesting that for every meeting that you have or every time you convene a subgroup of your network, that you think about posting and having available in front of folks, because we all learn and take in information so differently, some public agreements about how you want to all work together. And so I tweaked this a little bit from previous models that we've used. In fact, I've tweaked all of them, but this time I've really tweaked it so that if you're a network wanting to build in innovation and creativity, just take a look at this real quickly and see if you find anything that you could use in your network on how you want to engage your members or your advisory group. Just take a quick look at that. One of the questions that we had in the pre-work was, how many times a year do you really engage in creativity and innovation? There's some thinking that out there that it doesn't hurt to do it at each time you convene. You may or may not explicitly call it out, but you may want to say that thinking out of the box is essential, and you have to balance that with your unique network. Some networks have so many ideas that it's almost idea burdened. They can't move to implementation, and so there's just a real balance. And only you can determine with your board or advisory group about how often you want to go into brainstorming. Sometimes it's every meeting, sometimes it's 4 times a year, sometimes it's a year, but my perspective is that if you're able to talk about creativity and innovation being part of how your board works together or how your advisors work together, that's a step forward. So anyway, just a reminder that having public agreements, co-created public agreements, is just a mighty fine way to start any meeting. Okay, so here we go on innovation and creativity and building a culture that supports change and supports communication and supports effective board or advisor contributions. It's that whole ability to think big, think outside the box, and yet do so in a way that, as David has up here, as we think about innovation and creativity, that really moves us to supporting vision and mission. Pull out, as I said, Section E if you haven't had a chance to do that yet. Again, we'll be working with 5 questions. You've also seen this slide, the 5th slide or 6th slide, a number of times, but I just want to do one more reminder because we only come together for about 45 minutes once a month. A rural health network, one that's beginning or one that's adding new programs. I just want to point out again that one of the things that contributes to the need to embed and think about creativity and innovation is that each network that we have on this call, each of the 700 plus networks that exist around the United States, some have been in existence for 7 months and some for 30 plus years, they're each unique. They're each visionary, and they each respond to a very specific set of needs in a community. And we know just the geographic of the United States drives a lot of unique differences across how we deliver. Some things that are common, though, among networks is looking at how we achieve quality, affordable, and sustainable health care. And usually in rural areas, my finding is that is done so successfully by working together collaboratively. And magically enough, or thoughtfully enough, or strategically enough, however you want to categorize it, not only working collaboratively, but having those who often compete against one another work collaboratively is often an outcome of networks. So with that in mind, it really seems to call for this whole approach of thinking about if we are unique and we each face unique challenges, we often have competitors collaborating. How would we and could we use innovation and creativity to build a responsiveness to the communities that we're in? So here's what we're going to focus on today: common tools for unique networks, and hopefully we'll pull from you some thoughts on surviving and thriving. And if you'll again take your assessment tool, here is the first question that's posed. When you think about your network staff, and we fully realize that often the staff might be the individual on this call. You might have some volunteers, you might have some advisors, board members. When you think about them, how fully do they understand the intention of the current grant, this particular grant that you're working under? And we know many of you have more than one grant, but this particular grant, do they fully understand it or barely understand it? Just take a quick. And then let's move to, we'll come back to this in a few moments, but let's take a look at what innovation and creativity mean. I don't want to read this to you, but just take a look at innovation and creativity. And while you're reading these definitions, go ahead and think about the last time you were together with your advisory board or your network board or advisors. And just in the chat box again, if you think about your last meeting and you were to rate that last meeting on a scale of 1 to 5, and what we're rating now is the level and amount of creativity and innovation as you rate it. So it's a personal kind of assessment there. One meeting, there was absolutely no innovation and creativity in the room. You had an agenda, you stayed on the agenda marched forward, and you were out on time, and it was a great meeting, but you would probably rank it as 1 to 2 for innovation and creativity, versus some out-of-the-box thinking, maybe 1 or 2 kind of crazy ideas, new thinking. So maybe you'd rate that meeting as a 4 to 5. So just quickly in here, if you think about your last meeting and then type in the chat box how you'd rate it. Good. Okay. So you can begin to see some trends here potentially of what's going on in the meetings. And by the way, as some of you noted, because each network is unique, it may not be appropriate for there to be brainstorming or there to be, conversations about what could we imagine happening in this community at every meeting, because you have some very key deliverables and you have a mission probably that you've articulated and you have some agreements around. But you can see that there's a real, a solid range here of 3s and 2s, probably primarily 1, 2s, and 3s, and then a couple of 4 or 5s. And so it's a question to you to think about as we go through this. What might happen if there was additional time spent or given on the agenda to allowing some brainstorming or some thinking about possible changes and innovation around how you're delivering services or new product line? So it's just a question to kind of hold lightly in your right hand as we go through this. What might it be time for is the question that you're holding. So I just always, I think some of you know this by now, I just think it's fun to think about quotes that have come down to us over history. I kind of think of networks as the pot, and they're empty inside until you get something like this network grant. There's an energy in communities to come together and address issues that have been unaddressed for a long time. And then we get a network grant, and so there's this wonderful container that exists, and we get to fill it. It becomes this framework for innovation and creativity. I don't want us to get too carried away here, but you might want to think about the infusion of the grant really in many, many ways gives you a chance to pull people together and to brainstorm through innovation and creativity on what's possible. So here's a framework as you're just considering. Do I need to have more time as we gather just to allow and to support and to encourage innovation and creativity? So kind of here are 3 frames that I'd like you to look at. It's not the results that matter most. And why would we say that? Why would we say it's not the results that matter most? If someone would like to have their voice join this, *2 will do it. But why is it the fact that in brainstorming and looking at different approaches, why is it that the result doesn't matter the most? This is important to kind of understand what's underneath this whole concept of how do we innovate and create as we go through? Great, I see some folks in the box. Speaking of thinking out of the box, this is fun. Okay. While we're getting that response, it's the process of engagement that supports innovation. In engagement, while it toggles to this first kind of formula for creating innovation and creativity, Kathy has tucked in here that a half-formed idea can morph into something else over time, it allows a brainstorming as an act, as a relationship building. Jenny, thank you for that, because you can see that these two frameworks, 1 and 2, matter the most. Sometimes I want to pick up on what Kathy has said in the chat box to share with all of us about it's not the results that matter most, it's the ability to see something new, perhaps, the half idea. So if any of you are Zumba, or maybe it's pronounced Zimba, but anyway, exercise fiends, and maybe it's this time of year where, I don't know about all of you, but we're kind of soaked in rain here in Seattle. Other parts of the country are a little soaked in snow, so that indoor exercise becomes even more important, it seems. The whole Zumba craze was started because they had a very staid exercise tape that they rolled out in every class. And that's the language they use, very staid. Well, what happened is the founder was conducting a class one time, forgot his exercise a tape, or probably an app on his iPhone at this point, and all he had was salsa music. Well, that crazy mistake he made of not having the appropriate equipment turned out to be the best mistake that had occurred. They began to change the whole exercise into salsa and movement and kind of fun and laughter, and in the middle of winter it became the best kind of format of exercise. So for those networks who are thinking about healthy interactions as part of, and wellness as part of your product line, perhaps a half-formed idea of forgetting how you originally shaped it and bringing in some salsa or country western music or whatever might be the idea. But it's not the actual result, it's the journey to that, as Kathy said. As David points out here, this whole process of engagement, it takes practice. It takes courage, doesn't it? Think about sitting around a table. You're in this work, if you're the leader of the network, every day. It's kind of top of mind for you every day. But if you're just a board member coming once a month, or an advisor coming to a couple of meetings a month, you have to come in and adjust your head and learn how to brainstorm in comfort with people who may be strangers to you. Now that erodes over time, and you begin to build relationships, and often kind of this idea of brainstorming brings people closer together, as long as no one thinks someone else is crazy. So you're building this framework of it's okay to engage. It's okay to support collaboration. It's okay to integrate unique ideas and needs. And so that balance between identifying needs and ideas works. And I just want to summarize. Thank you all for chatting in the box with us. I know that I hope that works for everyone. I just want to pick up the last phrase of the last posting here by David. The outcome of innovation and creativity is often the building of relationships. And if we think back to the work we did on communication and change, we know that we really need to have that stickiness of relations, and we need to have the ability to bring up diverse opinions. And that bringing up diverse opinions supports change, enhances communication, and it's really the glue that often allows traction and long-term sustainability of networks. I know I'm throwing a lot together in that phrase, and I probably feel like I have so much more to share with you in this really thoughtful and critical work you're doing. So if I need to slow down, just give the flag here. here we go. How do innovation and creativity emerge? Many of you are very pragmatic network leaders and know that at the bottom line is you need to create a sustainable organization, sustainable community forum. And so how is that supported through innovation and creativity? Let's go back to looking at the culture, what's important, what emerges in every meeting. And let's look at the second question on your survey tool or your assessment tool. So here it is. How does your board define innovation, or would they if you asked them? I asked you to do that, and you did a great job of pouring out some definition. So how does your board, if you think through every member of your board or your advisory group, how do they define innovation? And what one example of their innovation might you document? And if you don't mind sharing one example of that in the chat box, that would be great. Or, again, star 2. I haven't had anyone step into star 2, so if you want to be the first, go for it. So one example of innovation, and this is hopefully where we'll begin to see the uniqueness of each of the networks here. And while you're doing that and sharing some of the ways that you've witnessed and really supported innovation in your group, is look at that third question as well. How does creativity show up? And often, if we flash back here, well, I'll come back to the answers in a second that are coming in here. Innovation is making changes in something established. Creativity is I almost think of creativity as a whiteboard, and you're using imagination or brainstorming to create these original ideas. So innovation is to make changes in something, to tweak it, to take a morphed idea and make some process changes or add a new advisory member, add a new part of the state to your network. So anyway, those are the two definitions of innovation and creativity, and we're tracking those here with members of your board. So let's see what we have here. Trying techniques to enhance collaboration. Great. That often people forget that innovation and creativity often happens in just how you engage in a board meeting or an advisory meeting. And I would encourage you to think about those as monumental times. Often the most important part of any network board meeting that I ever held was the check-in, is what we called it, happened to call it in Oregon, the check-in that occurred when the CEOs of hospitals came together, and it allowed them to get their heads in the room, to relax a little bit, and to talk about the unique areas that they were dealing with. And so just by way of check-in, innovation appears. Bringing rural partners to the network. Is bringing, partners by hosting presentation luncheons and inviting elected officials. Great. So you can see an infusion into a conversation of unexpected ideas by bringing in elected officials. Anytime you want to perhaps get a new idea in a safe way, sometimes bringing a guest speaker is a wonderful way to stir the imagination in a very safe way, because someone else is speaking about what has worked. You could videotape video in one another if you've kind of made connections here, and share with your board something that's happening in the Berkshires, for example, back to Michigan and vice versa. So there's some ways to do that. David, you've really pointed out here the reminder that not only is your network unique, but every community that your network has decided to be responsible for and to is also unique. So keeping that in mind, you have a wealth. You just have a wealth of creative ideas at your fingertips. And just simply sometimes asking open-ended questions at meetings allows unexpected ways of doing things to emerge from this uniqueness. Great. And I don't want to lose, because aren't we all about how, being here to serve our customers, our patients, however we want to define those that we're geared to serve, inviting them into the forum and into board meetings. If we have time, I'll share with you what occurred in Prince of Wales when we did some work there, and full credit goes to Gretchen. They're the leader of the network there in Prince of Wales. But bringing customers into the room is just really important and a creative way to get some ideas into the flow. So let's move on and do that mapping that I told you about. So I'd like each of you, if you could, just to kind of jot down a list of all of your board members or your advisory members. And hopefully, I think the most, if I remember from our last call, some of you had 12 board members or advisory members. Some of you had the range of 3 to 5. So if you'll just, maybe stop at 7, or if you've got time, list them all down. What we're going to do is a little human mapping here. And if I had you all present, I'd really kind of do this. It's quite fun to see this kind of stand up and have people go to where they feel comfortable on a spectrum of innovation, 1 to 5, as you did just a few minutes ago, and actually stand up so you can see where the comfort level is in the room. Of course, you only do this if people are feeling a lot of trust that's going on. So if you've listed the names of all of your players, is everybody ready for that? I'm just going to assume that everybody's listed that. I'd like you to kind of look at this pie here, and this is a virtual human mapping that we're going to do. If you were to, for each individual, label them as innovative thinkers on your group. And by the way, as much as we need innovative thinkers, we also need those who can get the work done. So we need this wonderful balance. We need the both and. But right now we're focused on innovators. So if you think of your group, again, on that scale of 1 to 5 each member, and if you'd put by each name, they're between a 1, not a terribly innovative thinker, to a 5, a really robust innovative thinker, 1 to 5 on each name, and then let's see where they land in this pie. And I think we probably all fully recognize that these are our assumptions that are out here on how we've interacted with these people. If they were self-rating, they might have something different. But this just kind of gives you a chance to get some historical information. So if everyone has that, if you were, again, to look then and tell us where does your network land based on the membership of your current board, and the membership of, or the membership of your current advisory group, just use that chat box again and say, do you fall in the 10 to 30 innovative category, 40 to 60% of your members are innovative, or 70 to 90? So just kind of go ahead and get that in the chat box. There we go, 40%, 70 to 90, 40. Good. So you can begin to see there's also, if we think back about how you build communication in a network, first you're getting members together. There's usually some flow in and out. Then you have a steady crew. You begin to build trust. And then you can build a vision and a mission. And then you begin to brainstorm, innovate, and create on often how to deliver on that vision and mission. Not a linear path. Yeah, many of these things happen simultaneously, but it's really good to know. So if you're feeling stagnant, if there isn't much traction on the vision, you might want to look at this mapping that you've done here and saying, if I'm sitting at 10 to 30, Polly, that tells me, and I'm making huge assumptions here, that means that Polly probably has done a lot of work on the creativity and innovation necessary, and so they really have a great plan for moving forward. They know what needs to be done, and they've got traction on that. If we look at Monica, for example, sitting at 40 to 60, it might be, if we look at your network, and again, I'm making some assumptions here, of course, but Monica has a great group willing to kind of roll up their sleeves and do some of that creative brainstorming. What's possible, drawing ideas from the unique communities that are served by the network, really pulling up promising practices. So you can begin to see that depending on where your network is, if you're delivering on the mission and vision or if you're just creating it, where innovation falls. I also want to pause on this particular slide and let you know that innovation requires, it absolutely requires historical information. So all the brainstorming we have, it really helps to have that member of the board who can say, we tried that before and it didn't work. And I know sometimes for innovators and creative thinkers, that's like, oh my gosh. But that historical information and innovation really is a mix that you don't want to separate. Historical information you follow up with, that didn't work with, and what did work in that, and what held us back from success. Why didn't it work? What were 3 of the items that kind of blocked traction there? You really want to unpack what happened historically. So here we go. This is question 4 on your assessment. And you've just done that assessment as you review. And you might actually want to put this 40 to 60 or 79 to 90 in here just to remind yourself that you really looked through every board member and kind of, or every advisory member and did a percentage here. Are 50% of them innovators in their communities and or organizations? We ask you about the network specifically, sitting on your network, but they probably are that way back in their community as well. If not, if they're not innovators and you feel you need that, how might you grow this capacity? So this is a question of what actions might you specifically take 4 times a year or at every board meeting, depending on what you need, to kind of infuse a little bit of brainstorming, a little bit of sharing best practices, a guest speaker, bringing in consumers, bringing in elected officials, beaming in one another into your board meetings to share what's going on in one part of the country with another part of the country. Not that you'll duplicate, but you can tinker with and have great results. So the second part of this question is, how might you grow this capacity? And I just kind of rolled off about 5 different things you could do, but 1 or 2 on your assessment that you want to think about doing. And I need to forewarn you that you know how I believe you need to go experiment with things. So this question number 4, the second part of the question is going to be the last slide or the next to the last slide on this presentation, because we'd really like you to take 1 or 2 of those potential actions and really make a commitment to experiment with them and give yourself a date by which you'd like to experiment. Please feel free to share with your TA the outcome of that. But just to let you know, question 4 really ties to an action we'd like you to take at the end. Okay, I'm going to assume that you've been able to capture the percentage of innovators and creative thinkers on your board. And again, the caveat that we need pragmatists as well as creative thinkers. And if you need innovation and creativity on your advisory board, what 1 or 2 things, 1 or 2 actions might you take to increase that? Let's move on and say, here's another way to think about community change. This is what I often call a soft launch for creativity and innovation. And some of you may have already chosen to do this. If you want to build into your agenda, for example, a time for some innovative thinking about next steps, about what you're going to do next year, what you might want to do post this grant, what additional funding you might want to seek. You might want to have one of your network board members or advisors kind of be the focal point. Often what's fun is to, and this depends on how much fun, quote unquote, your board members or advisories have with technologies, but using Google Doc as a way to kind of list ideas and have everyone go in and have access to that Google Doc and put in their great ideas. You know, how can we build increased participation in our wellness program? And just, it can be wild thinking, but this is where you have people just put in their ideas in technology, and so your chair could have their 7 ways to increase participation, and then other people are able to plunk in their ideas. And then on a document, for those who are kind of, as this group is, able to participate in a chat box, this really begins to draw ideas from people in a different way. Some people feel comfortable communicating in a group verbally, others like another approach. So you're, again, if you think back to how we communicate, we have to communicate taking into account people's different ways of learning and communicating. And so for those very comfortable brainstorming in a meeting, there's that approach, and this is brainstorming before a meeting. So there's just many different ways to do this. I wanted to tell you a quick story about Prince of Wales. This was a particular network, and this was a couple of years ago. Very, very rural area, cut off an island, and so those of you who may live on islands know that islands have a particular culture, and so they had a network that had worked together, an advisory board network that had worked together for probably 3 to 5 years. They had trust in one another, and they were just terrific brainstormers. They really enjoyed looking at what was needed on Prince of Wales and were really able to do incredible brainstorming. And so Gretchen came to the table as the kind of second executive director of this group and said, we really need to do something. So brainstorming is step 1 of innovation and creativity. Doing something is step 2 of innovation and creativity, acting on those brainstorms. And so what they decided is that they were going to go ahead and make sure that every child on Prince of Wales received the appropriate shots before the age of 2. Little did they know that was going to consume at least a year of work with the providers on the island determining what was an appropriate set of shots a small child. They actually raised, I think, the age to 2 because there was not total agreement. There was a very diverse population on the island and still is, and so bringing providers together was something very, very new. In that very, very new group of providers coming together, there was tremendous innovation. And I know many of you have done the same sort of convening of folks that have never had a chance to speak to one another. It's that pulling together, as David mentioned earlier, of diversity in communities and putting them around a table, and you become the facilitator of this amazing creative session. So they were able as providers to come together and working together where they'd never really had that chance before. They'd met each other in grocery stores, but never had a chance professionally to say, how do we want to provide service to our patients under the age of 2 and their family members? And so they were able to decide what shots children needed, for what reasons, when they should be given, and actually came out with a portable passport because, again, reimbursement for each one of these differed by each insurance company on the island and each insurance provider. So it took a year of work, but that was one of the most creative and innovative coming together and facilitated conversations of diversity I've had the privilege of witnessing. And I know many of you have had these in your communities, but sometimes just giving a chance for conversations and allowing the time necessary is really critical. So I'm going to pause here and say, does anyone have a quick example they want to give of convening a diverse group of people into building something new and creative, and how much time that took? So what was the idea? how many people did you have together, and what was the outcome. So you can either hit *2 or chat in the box. And I see Barry is going for it. Great, thank you. So what was the idea? How many people did you have around the table? And just how much time did it take? The time and timing is always interesting in innovation and creativity. Okay. I know that box is so small, it kind of limits the thinking and detracts, I know, from the real powerful coalition building that takes place in facilitating tables of diverse thinking. But thank you all for jumping in and not hesitating. Okay, great. You can begin to see, oh gosh, Barry, 25 providers. That is a lot of brainstorming around a table. Well done. And then, Kathy, you have a really wonderful approach here. Instead of providers coming in potentially, my understanding of what you've posted is just going out, beginning to look at health clinics outside and using a shared services between competitors. 8 people in 1 year. So look at Barry's 5 years, 1 year, and then that's a lot of time, but you can begin to see that innovation and that creativity, that thinking out of the box, and then landing on what the box should look like and being able to build it together. And sometimes we have pilots that make it or don't. It really does take time. It really does take the voices. And David is saying that one of the best things that worked for his group is a subcommittee of 4. That's a really great observation, David, of sometimes 4 voices around a table can move more quickly. You don't say here how much time things took, but often with 4 people you're able to move a little more swiftly. And then you deal only with those who are not around the table. And that's a wonderful risk that network leaders need to be able to assess and take under consideration. Great, thank you for those. I just wanted to put a dose of realism here as we think about creativity and innovation. I want to move us to question 5 at this point, and because I also am going to leave a little bit of time for Becky on the end to talk about some resources. This is the 5th and final grid. It's the 5th and final question that you have. So this asks you to step back, and you've assessed how many of your board members or advisory members fall into this innovative, creative category. What are some of the top challenges you're going to encounter as you wrap up this planning year? And in the first one, what are the startup challenges, whether it's for a startup challenge for a network or a new project or a new service? List up to 3 challenges. And in the second box, for each one of the challenges, identify at least one stakeholder for each challenge. Who's a key player? You know, I happen to agree with David. I think there's some magic in saying who are the 3 or 4 that are the key stakeholders here, because out of this you begin to see a possible action step. That's what we're really driving for. And then in the third part of that box, or the fourth part of that box, rate the challenge again, 1 to 5. 1 meaning not a challenge at all. This is a slam dunk. Everybody's going to say makes total sense. Oops, I reversed my own scale. 1 means it's impossible to resolve. 5 means it's easy to resolve. Apologize for that. So rank your challenge. And then again, what are potential resources? At least 1 for each challenge. Might be applying for a new grant. Might be looking at a local foundation. It might be a Kickstarter campaign. Could be any number of things. So this is a really quick kind of a gap assessment, a quick gap assessment in the form of a grid. So I want to give you a chance to go ahead and fill out that one for your assessment. That is the last part of the assessment itself. I don't want to rush it, but I want to give you a few minutes here. I'm just curious, for those of you who have listed the challenges in box 1 and you're now rating it in box 3, of the 2 or 3 challenges you're listing, are they all number 1 in the form of challenges, 1 to 2, kind of on that tough end of the spectrum, or are they 4s or 5s? Kind of just seeing where your challenges exist. And if you're finding your challenges are on a 1 to 2, thinking about actual steps to engage creativity and innovation become even more important here. Anyone have 1 or 2? You want to tuck it in the chat box really quickly? Most of your challenges are 1 or 2s, or most of your challenges are 4 or 5s? Or are you still thinking? Oh, so thank you. Thank you for the question. So in the first box, you're talking about the challenges that you still face in your network. And if you were to rank or rate the challenges this is a very complex challenge we're facing. That would be a 1 or a 2, and then a 5 means that it's an easy challenge to face. It's probably more a matter of timing, and so you can make time for it. Kathy's got a response here. She's got a nice range. I want to point out that if all of your challenges have a ranking of a 1 or a 2, you're probably going to be a really exhausted and tired network leader. Now, I could be wrong. You could thrive on having all your challenges 1 or 2s. Kathy has a range here of 4 3s and 2s, and that is a really excellent range to have in terms of leveraging creativity and innovation, and knowing when you need additional new ideas, when you're willing to pilot, and when you have something that really deserves and needs much more in terms of resources and individuals. Great. You can begin to see here the different challenges you all are facing, and this confirms the uniqueness of what you're facing in your unique communities. Startup capital, bylaws, needing to amend them, getting agreement between 19 different networks. You can really begin to see, just from this really quick assessment, I call it a gap assessment in a way, challenges you need for sustainability, how you rate those, who some key stakeholders are, and in your box, if you have the same key stakeholders for every challenge, you might have an opportunity there for some creative thinking about who else might join in subcommittees. You want to be careful that not all your challenges are being handled by the same group of folks. Great. I'll let you, there is just some wonderful information here on this left-hand column in the chat box. Thank you all. I wish we could spend time and have just really quick case studies on each one of these, but we'll plunge ahead. And this last slide, before I turn it over to Becky, or the next to last slide before I ask you to take some action, is really about you as network leaders, and I alluded to this. If all the challenges are in the really hard end of the, 1 or 2, impossible, tough, complex, needing agreement between many, many diverse players, more than 4, network leaders need to be reminded that there are innovative tools for you yourself as a leader